Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, and perhaps you're on Roku or Amazon Fire TV or YouTube or our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. But each one of you, welcome. And today we'll be talking about something which people don't normally talk about. That's a small place in the world called Gaza. What's happening there? It is an Israeli-occupied land, which is ruled by occupied Palestinians. So it is like a prison being run by prisoners themselves. How does it work? What is life like? What people do there? How do they eat? Where do they go for hospital? And why in the world here and there somebody throws something which is called rocket? Wow, how did they develop that extraordinary technology of rockets? Who is providing them that technology? And why they do that? And I hear that when I Google the news, I find people playing music in a park, and some botanist came up with some black tomatoes, and he's growing that, and teenagers are making a art exhibit. So life seems pretty normal, is it? That's what we're going to ask. I have never been there, but two people, one of them himself is a Palestinian, born in Jerusalem and raised here, and another person is a Jewish person. So a Jewish person visiting Gaza, how is it possible? So our first guest, well, we have two guests. Ned Rosch. Ned is raised. Welcome to Muslim Network TV. Ned.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. He was raised as an observant Jewish, in the observant Jewish as well as Zionist family. He's named after a great uncle killed in the Holocaust. He worked on kibbutz and studied at the Hebrew University and has visited Gaza. And our second guest or co-guest is Alex Awad. Welcome, Reverend Alex Awad.
I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you. He was born and raised in Jerusalem. Reverend Awad was the pastor of an international church in East Jerusalem and taught courses in Bethlehem Bible College. So, Reverend Awad, how is life like in Gaza? I mean, people say the largest prison in the world, but prisoners are ruling themselves.
Well, you know, I used to travel to Gaza, and I used to teach a course in Gaza. So I would leave Bethlehem, where I used to live in Bethlehem, and drive for about an hour and 15 minutes until I got to the Eretz border crossing. And then I would cross the border. A person from Gaza will come and meet me in his car and take me into the city of Gaza. And so I did that. Every Thursday, I would go to Gaza, and Friday morning, I will come back to Bethlehem because I taught a class Thursday night at the YMCA in Gaza. But this gave me an exposure. This gave me an eyewitness look at the situation in Gaza. And, you know, once you are in Gaza with the people in Gaza, right in the city, you feel okay. But across the border, you feel like you are crossing several prisons, not only one prison, but almost like going from one prison to another prison to another prison until you get to the Gaza Strip. So it is really like an open air prison for about 2 million people.
What do you mean prison after prison after prison? I mean, you go in different, describe that for us.
Well, first of all, you get to the border, and you meet Israeli soldiers who will take your passport and let you sit down. You are sitting down outside until they call your name back again. Then they call your name, and you'll cross one stage after they give you the visa to come in. Sometimes they refuse the visa, and I have to go back to Bethlehem because for some reason, sometimes they don't tell you why, but sometimes they tell you you cannot go to Gaza today. And I went to Gaza not as a Palestinian, although I'm a Palestinian, but I go there because I'm an American. I have an American passport. If I was a Palestinian, I couldn't have the freedom to go from Bethlehem to Gaza and back. So I was a head of a charitable organization called the Shepherd Society. And this is why I was able to go to Gaza. But anyway, after I crossed that first cubicle, then we went on to search the luggage, to search me physically, you know, and then you go into a series of aluminum like chicken coops, you know, where you go from one to another with Israeli soldiers up watching every movement that you do. Once you get out of that, then you have to walk about a mile or a mile and a half to get to the Hamas checkpoint. Then you go to the Fatah checkpoint, and then you go to Gaza. So it's really, I mean, the time at the checkpoint is much longer time than the trip from Bethlehem to Gaza.
So what type of questions do they ask you while they are checking you, observing you?
Well, the obvious question is, why are you going to Gaza? You know, and of course, I'm a pastor, I'm a minister, I'm a Christian, and I'm the head of a charitable organization. So I tell them I'm going to Gaza to oversee the contributions and the ministry of my people, of the people who are donating, you know, whether it is money or whether it is medicine or whether it is food for the people of Gaza. So I have to explain to them everything I'm doing. They'll ask me if I have weapons on me. And of course, I don't carry weapons. They ask me, do I know anybody in Gaza? I say, of course, I know somebody in Gaza. Otherwise, I wouldn't be going to Gaza. And, you know, so who do you know? And of course, I have to give them names of, you know, Christian friends in Gaza who are members of the committee who do the charitable work in Gaza. So these are the kinds of questions they ask me.
So, Ned, tell me, when you were trying to go there, what process did you go through? I mean, you both are American. One is Christian, one is Jew, but you have experience of living and being raised for a few years in Israel also. So what was your experience of getting into Gaza?
Well, it's very similar to what Alex just described. You know, we should emphasize that Gaza is a prison. Gaza is sealed off by the Israelis on 3/4 of the Gaza Strip. The other quarter is Egypt, which also seals it in cooperation with the Israelis. And then, of course, there's the Mediterranean Sea, and that is barricaded by the Israeli Navy. So people that live in Gaza, which is one of the most crowded places in the world, 2 million people in an area that is smaller than metropolitan Portland, Oregon, they cannot leave, with very few exceptions. Occasionally, people are let out for medical reasons. Occasionally, business people are let out. Occasionally, a student is let out. But by and large, if you're our age, you might have lived in Gaza your entire life and never left this tiny strip of land. For me to get in was the only reason I got in, actually. I wanted to go for many, many years, but again, people are not allowed in. Israel does not want you to see Gaza. The Gazans would love people to come in, but that's not the situation that Israel would like. So the only way I could get in was I actually, after a career as a lawyer, I became a yoga teacher. And as a yoga teacher, I qualified to be part of a medical delegation that was going in, and I taught stress reduction and relaxation techniques. And that was an amazing opportunity in that I didn't go in as a tourist. I mean, no one really goes as a tourist to Gaza. But I went in as a health practitioner and was able, therefore, to meet real people in situations where, you know, there are very few places in the world more stressful than living in Gaza. Unemployment is well over 50%. For young people, it's much higher than that. People are incredibly poor. 2/3 of the people are refugees from 1948, when Israel was created. The situation is pretty dire, pretty desperate. Israel has, in a sense, put the people in Gaza on a diet. That's using their terminology, Israel's terminology. So the stress level is through the roof. And
wait a minute. Israel says that they have put Gazan people on a diet because they are overweight or something?
Yeah, it wasn't because they're overweight. It's because one of the Israeli generals was perhaps a little bit more glib and accurate than maybe he should have been from the Israeli point of view, but that's what he said. We put them on a diet. And what that means is that everything going in or out of Gaza is inspected by the Israeli authorities. And they have calculated how many calories are required to keep the population alive, but not thriving.
Oh my goodness, so there is a science behind it.
It's a very sick science, if you want to call it science, yes.
Huh. Well, knowing that your grandfather, your grand uncle was murdered in Holocaust, I mean, in those camps, probably the same sick science was applied, that how much people can eat and how much people cannot eat, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, I don't want to get into the, I don't want to compare the Holocaust to what's happening in Gaza, because I'm not sure it's an apt analogy. What's happening in Gaza is stark enough, horrible enough, illegal enough that it speaks and stands on its own. So we don't need to compare it to what the Nazis did. But, to get back to what I was about to share with you, and that is when I put people into relaxed state, the emotions that came up were really emotions I'll remember and the stories I'll remember forever. One man told me after a deep relaxation experience that I put people through that he wanted me to have a book. And I said, what is the book? And he said, well, my home, he lived in Shujaiya, which is an area of Gaza that was heavily bombed by the Israelis in 2014. And he went back to his home and it had been totally demolished. And he climbed up to the top of the home with me following him the next day. And he presented me with this book and he said, I want you to have it. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's a book of comparative literature between two famous English writers. And I think what he was saying to me is that they can destroy our homes, they can destroy everything at will, because they are incredibly powerful. And we don't even have an army as people in Gaza. We have no way to defend ourselves, but what they can't destroy are ideas. And not just of English writers, but of freedom. And ideas that Palestinians deserve, like every other people on the planet, to live with dignity, with justice, and in freedom.
So you were describing that there are different neighborhoods there, and Reverend Awad, you were saying that there are refugees within that so-called open-air prison, population. So how this neighborhood and refugees interact? I mean, I mean, they're probably all of them are refugees in one way or the other, but how they are differentiated, how they are treated, is there a different neighborhoods? I mean, are there, so tell us a little more about how the neighborhoods are defined.
Yeah, amazingly, like any other big city or big enclave like the Gaza Strip or any other place in the world, there are different communities in the Gaza Strip. I mean, there is the Jabalia refugee camp where you have about 70,000 people living there, and they are all refugees. Their homes have been at one time in what we call today Israel. And in 1948, they were pushed or really ethnically cleansed from their homes in Israel, and now they live in Gaza. So there are several refugee camps. About 75% of the population of Gaza are people who are refugees, who at one time lived in what we call today the state of Israel. So there are the refugee camps, but there is also Gaza City, where the indigenous people of Gaza, before the refugees came, lived there in the city, and they are the more prosperous people in the Gaza City. You can see buildings, you can see hotels, you can see seaside resorts, and so on. And sometimes it is really pleasant to be there. I mean, sometimes I liked it more than I liked Bethlehem, and the people are extremely, extremely nice. But there are also the makeshift tent cities. When I went to the Gaza,
so there are original people, indigenous people, and then the refugee camp, and then there are literally tents of people.
There are tent cities. When the Israelis, for example, they destroyed a lot of Gaza in 2014. I mean, they destroyed whole buildings, and the people who lived in those buildings, they couldn't find any residency in Gaza because there were no homes for them. So international humanitarian organizations, they got them tents. So they were tent cities. And I would go to minister to the people in the tent cities. And these are people who are waiting for the reconstruction of Gaza so that they can live in residency and in homes. So
let me, Reverend Awad, take a short break. When we come back, we talk about the people in the tent. I thought, so there are definitely multiple layers of difficulties for people who are living, how long they have been living. You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with two people who have been to Gaza and were learning what is life like that there. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Malik Mujahid, and with me is Ned Rosch and Reverend Awad, and we're talking about people in Gaza. So you mentioned, I mean, when I was checking news this morning, what is the news from Gaza? One of the things came out that a child patient died in Gaza because his family was unable to secure an exit permit. So the people which you're mentioning live in camp, or they live in the refugee camp in tents or refugee camps, or in the Gaza city, which is the people who have been living there before the Israeli occupation. Do each one of them suffer differently? who might be this person or child patient who could not get exit permit? I'm assuming exit permit is from getting out of Gaza to some hospital, probably. Anyone else, you have any idea about that?
That child could be any child in Gaza. It could be he could or she could be from Gaza City. They could be from Khan Yunis. They could be from Rafah. They could be from anywhere in the Gaza Strip. Because when it comes to the health situation and to the medical provisions, everybody in Gaza suffers. Everybody, whether they live in a refugee camp or in a tent city or in high-rise apartments or by the seashore, everybody suffers from the health situation because, according to the United Nations reports, Gaza lacks, the Gaza hospitals and the medical providers, they lack the medicines, they lack the hospital beds, they lack the equipment. And I mean, that's even before COVID-19. Before the pandemic came, they lacked all of these things. And so right now, with the threat of the pandemic, the situation is really dire in the Gaza Strip. But that belongs, I mean, that threat to everyone in Gaza, because it's very hard for them to cross the arid border and get to Jerusalem or to Bethlehem, where they can get medication, or to cross Rafah and get to Egypt. And sometimes the children and pregnant women, they die on the border, trying to cross the border, and they lose their life because of all the security measures that they have to go through before they can cross the border.
So was that the reason you were part of this medical group which went there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what the people of Gaza want more than anything is to do what we're doing right now, which is to talk and tell the world about the situation in Gaza, because it is desperate and it is really illegal and immoral what the Israelis are doing, sealing in a group of people. And as Alex said all the time, people that are sick and need to get out to a hospital in Jerusalem or in Europe or the United States are denied permission to do so by the Israeli authorities. And again, as I was saying, there's limited food, there's limited jobs, there's limited opportunity for children, for youth. It's a place that has been sealed off from the world, and that's what's immoral about this situation. And that's why it's very important that we tell the story of Gaza. Let me just share with you, for example, as I'm talking right now, what's playing through my head is after one of the relaxation classes I taught, a man said to me, you know, sometimes I say to my wife, we have 3 children. Sometimes I say to my wife, I wish we hadn't had those children.
Oh.
Not because we don't love them, but because we love them so much. And we're afraid of what they're going to experience as they grow up in Gaza.
And part of the difficulty now in Gaza is the fact that the administration here, the Trump administration, have cut all the support for UNRWA. This is the United Nations relief agency that helped the refugees throughout the Middle East, in Palestine and in Gaza. So the Trump administration made a decision to cut all of that aid in order to put pressure on Palestinians to accept the deal of the century, Trump's deal of the century. And so even the humanitarian organizations that are trying to help Gaza are finding it very, very difficult because of you know, the United States cutting millions of dollars that was allotted for their aid.
Tell me about how then in that situation, how much US was giving? In today's news, there was that Spain finances 1 million worth of Gaza desalination project. There were some news about European Union doing something for food security in Gaza. Is the different government, if US has, Trump administration is blocked, has the other countries stepping up to help?
Ned, do you have an answer to this question?
I mean, are they,
and then I'll add to it.
different?
Yeah, other countries are stepping up, and not only European countries, but also Gulf states like Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirate countries. So Arab Muslim countries and European countries are trying to cover up what the United States have failed to do. But still, the situation is urgent, and still UNRWA is reporting deficits in its budget because of the sudden cut of American aid to the organization. And it's sad to cut aid because the Americans want the Palestinians to accept their, what they call their peace plan, which is not really a peace plan. But it's very cynical, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but also it's immoral and unethical.
You know, Palestinians in many ways, especially those in Gaza, are like victims of crime, but they have to live it twice. Once when it happened in 1948 or 1967, when people were displaced or ethnically cleansed, and then again and continually when their situation and the reality of it is denied by not just the Israelis, but by the Americans and many others in the world. And this victimization that is always with the Palestinian people is very difficult to live with. In spite of that, you know, I mean, Alex certainly knows this, and many of your listeners do as well. There is a joy, there is a sense of life that happens. I can tell you that one woman that I taught in Gaza City said to me, because I was explaining to the people about how we just take one breath at a time. We breathe in, we breathe out. The last breath is gone. The future breath hasn't come yet. We can only focus on the current breath. And she said, that's what I have finally realized is all I can do in my life. Past, the history is gone. You know, we were decimated by the Israelis. It's gone. The future, who knows what it brings? But we have today. And today I will try to bring joy to somebody. I'll try to raise my children well. I'll try to feed the hungry. I'll do what I can do.
What are their hopes about freedom? I mean, they have been in this situation which perpetuates itself, and peace plan comes, which looks like a joke. So how these people in Gaza keep up the hope? Tell me, Awad, if you know somebody in the tents. I mean, how long have they been in those tents, which are not proper refugee camp even?
I've been out of that ministry in Gaza since I retired and came to live in the United States. So I'm not really there to know the situation with these tents today. But I would say about the people, whether they are in the tents, in the refugee camps, or in the high-rise apartments in Gaza, the Palestinian people are very resilient, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. They just refuse to die. They also refuse to give up on their hopes. You know, you come to a Palestinian child in a refugee camp, whether it is in Gaza or the Dahish refugee camp in Bethlehem, or the Gaza refugee camp also in Bethlehem, and you ask the refugee boy or girl, where are you from? And you would be surprised, even though they are born in Bethlehem or in Gaza, they'll tell you the name of the town in Israel today where it used to be their town before their grandparents became refugees. And the reason for that is that aspiration, that hope in their hearts that one day they are going to go back home, that one day they are going to have freedom, one day they are going to live at peace. So it's, I mean, I am, even as a Palestinian, I am really amazed at the resiliency and the strong willpower of the Gaza people to live and continue to survive in spite all of the odds.
And I think that
Matt, share with me, were there any people who use poetry or something, artistic expression for their longing for freedom?
The question is for you, Ned.
Oh,
You are the artist.
I think that, like Alex was saying, the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine have refused to go away and have refused to play this game of being a people that have been destroyed. In many ways, I think that, the situation in Gaza and in Palestine is somewhat like the situation in this country. In this country, it's a settler colonial country where the indigenous people were ethnically cleansed. In Palestine, the unique difference is that now, if you look at historic Palestine, 50% or 51% of the people are Palestinian and 49 to 50% are Jewish. Now, what that means is that Israel has become an apartheid country, where you have a minority ruling over a majority. And there really are about 5 million Palestinians that were exiled from Palestine, who are living as refugees, who are living in this country, living in Syria, living in Lebanon, Jordan. And some of them would return. So in fact, there is a strong majority of Palestinian people who deserve to be in Palestine. So I think a lot of people, are saying that the triumph will ultimately happen. It's inevitable. Apartheid cannot last forever. It didn't last forever in South Africa. It won't last forever in Israel. And Israel has sold a bill of goods to people saying we are a Jewish democratic country. Well, you can't be both. Either you're Jewish or you're democratic. It'd be like saying this is a white Christian democratic country. Either you're white and Christian or you're a democratic country. You can't be both. Yeah. And so in Israel, the Israeli Jews, by and large, have chosen to be a Jewish country. They've made their choice. But that is not one that is sustainable over the long haul.
I agree very much with what Ned have said. Yesterday, I have a webinar dialogue with a Jewish rabbi from New Mexico. And he's a Reformed Jewish rabbi. And we had a very, very friendly and constructive dialogue. But he kept, denouncing the idea of the one-state solution. And he is very, very much strong on a two-state solution from the Mediterranean Sea to the River Jordan. And, I told the rabbi that Netanyahu said, as long as I live, there will never be a Palestinian state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Well, Mr. Netanyahu, and I would say to the Israeli government and all Israelis, and even to this rabbi, how can you not allow for a Palestinian state, and at the same time, you are so much against a one-state solution? When, like Ned said, now almost a little bit over half of the people from the Mediterranean Sea to the River Jordan are Palestinians, and about the other half are Jewish. So is Israel going to continue to dominate the Palestinian people forever and ever? And is Israel able to do that without being an apartheid state? It's impossible.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Awad and Ned Rosch. We'll continue this conversation. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with the Reverend Awad and Ned Rosch. You know, there was a time when news around the world will be Palestinian PLO, Palestinian Liberation Army, I guess, at one time will occupy places and Jewish places, hijack planes, and they were an armed struggle. They agreed to withdraw from the armed struggle, and in Oslo Accord, and people got Nobel Prizes for peace and everything. And since then, I guess the struggle is mostly peaceful. Do you find Palestinians regret giving up armed struggle for freedom?
Okay, as a Palestinian who is committed to non-violence, I'll try to answer this, but I don't know whether my perspective represents all Palestinian people. But definitely, Palestinians have at the Oslo Agreement in 1993, the Palestinians accepted Israel's statehood on over 80% of historic Palestine, in return of what they thought that the Israelis will give them much of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to create a Palestinian state. Regrettably, that Rabin, who signed the Oslo Agreement, was assassinated by a radical Israeli. And the leaders, Israeli leaders after Rabin, would not live up to the stipulations in the 1993 Oslo Agreement. And so the Palestinians today, we look back at the Oslo Agreement and we feel like we were cheated. Maybe we were deceived, and perhaps we were gullible. When we signed the Oslo Agreement, we put too much trust in the Israeli government and in what Rabin had said, because he said, read my lips, no more Jewish settlements in the West Bank. And we trusted in that, and we trusted within 5 years, we will see the birth of a Palestinian state. As a matter of fact, this did not happen. And because this did not happen, it created such anger within the Palestinian community that it moved some Palestinians into radicalism. And also it beefed the strength of the Hamas movement, because Hamas movement said, anyway, you cannot trust the Israelis. They will not give you what they have promised you. And therefore, the Israelis will only know the language of power, the language of strength, and the language of the gun. And so that's why the group in Ramallah who signed this Oslo Agreement, they were going along with the Israelis and with the Americans in order to survive. While the group in Gaza, I think they recognized the trick and they wouldn't fall into the trick. But of course, the Western world, especially the Americans and the Israelis, they start demonizing Hamas and demonizing the government in Gaza, even though it was elected legally by international observers. And Jimmy Carter, he said it was a fair and just election when Hamas won the election, but still the Western world did not want Hamas to win. And
So
therefore,
this is the reason I ask you this question. And do they regret? Because I have no idea. I have never been there. Because here and there, somebody throws a rocket. I don't know what type of rocket is that, but that, results in a whole lot of loss of life in Gaza when Israel start bombing, because so why and who continues to develop and throw these rockets, which causes further suffering of the Gazan people? I want to understand that. The question is to understand: is it coming from the regret that they went for peace and were deceived? Or this is one way to keep the Palestine issue in the news? Or there are some elements who, in all societies, there are people who want to do whatever they want to do. They don't want to abide by anything. So do anyone of you have any idea why these rockets, I don't know what those rockets actually do, but it just creates a huge news in America, and then suddenly comes Israel bombing them with all sort of things.
Well, let me jump in here, if I may, just real quickly. I think it's really important to set this in context. Way too often, and actually implicit to some degree in your question, is this sense that it's the Palestinians who are bringing violence to the table.
That's what in media is news headlines lead you to.
How the media portrays this, they call it a conflict. Let's set this whole thing in context. In 1948, Jewish militias that ultimately became the Israeli army ethnically cleansed the majority of Palestinians from historic Palestine to create the state of Israel. That was extreme violence. More than 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes at gunpoint, and this was the creation of the state of Israel. In 1967, a similar process happened. We can't understand 67 without understanding 48. Mm-hmm. The intention of the Israeli Zionist movement has always been to create a Jewish state in historic Palestine, which 100 years ago was more than 90% Palestinian. Now, to blame the violence here on Palestinians is really to miss the point. When you have been trampled upon, when you have someone with their boot to your neck or their knee to your neck, you do have a right under international law to fight back. The Palestinians have fought back sometimes, but by and large, if you look at the history, it's been a nonviolent struggle. The intifadas, to a large extent, were nonviolent. Mm-hmm. So we have to look at who really is the violent side here. And the reality is it's the Israelis, although the media, as you're saying, Imam, would have you believe just the opposite.
Yeah, thank you, Ned. And I would like to add, I mean, the history is important. What happened in 1948, what happened in 1967, the fact that Gaza is mainly made up of Palestinian refugees who lost their homes and possessions in what we call today Israel today. This is so true. But also, if we look at the details of when does a rocket gets out of Gaza into Israel, it is always connected to some kind of a killing or an attack by Israel on either Palestinians in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank, or after an event like, say, the Israeli settlers moved to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and they beat Palestinians or kill one or two Palestinians, then the Palestinians in Gaza get upset. Then you may find a rocket, going to the other side, but it is always after some Israeli aggression against Palestinians. Here's the problem with the media. They will quickly tell you about what the Gazans have done, the rocket that went from Gaza to Israel, but they don't tell you the whole story about what instigated that, what created the anger with Hamas or with the Palestinians, maybe killing a Hamas leader in Gaza that prompted the Gazans to do that. But our media here in the United States, most major media will not tell you the full story. And that's why people think there are only one people who are violent, the Palestinians, and the other people are the poor people who are defending themselves, the Israelis.
Well, this is the media story. The major newspaper, even New York Times and Washington Post included. There was a university who did a research of about 38 stories and headlines, and they found 90% of the time Muslims are covered in a negative sense by the same media.
Yeah.
So that's the reason we started Muslim Network Television, to have a voice and connect and listen. And I'm very thankful for both of you enlightening me personally. I'm supporter of Palestinians, and I'm a strong believer in peace and justice movement. And it has bothered me substantially that each news of rocket actually ends up in huge amount of misery for people. And of course, the media has its role, which covers it before the rocket real bombing begins. But one of the things, Ned, which I still don't fully understand, is why Israelis army goes after children. Why children are arrested? What is the? Are they trying to give a message to parents to watch out for their children? What is this? Why children? And there are so many videos and things like that. I hope they're all true. I have no way of authenticating, but it seems there is a focus on arresting children and snatching them away.
Well, that's a really important question. I think we have to understand that the Israeli society is to a large extent indoctrinated. What's fascinating about the Israeli Jewish society is it may be the only country in the world where the younger generation is actually more conservative politically than their parents. You don't find that in most countries.
Well, that will be very different than, say, young Jewish people in America.
That's fascinating in that young Jewish people in this country are increasingly moving to support the Palestinian struggle for liberation. Because young Jews, and our son is certainly one of them, believe that Zionism has really been a historic error, that it has done almost irreparable damage to Judaism. Because when the Zionists linked their political struggle to a religion, and the religion, by and large, or religious leaders, by and large, embraced it, so many rabbis embraced Zionism in a belief, and perhaps for some of the original thinkers, it was a legitimate belief. It was a well-founded, perhaps well-intentioned belief, nonetheless historically wrong, but a belief that after 2,000 years of suffering, after 1,000 years in Europe of suffering under anti-Semitism, after the Holocaust, that maybe Jews needed a sanctuary, a home. The problem, of course, is that this came at the expense of another people that already was living there, the Palestinians. And so you now have young Jewish people coming to terms with this and reconciling this in very profound ways that, in essence, are the beginnings and glimmers of hope for reclaiming Judaism from Zionism. So now we have a fascinating thing happening within the Jewish world, where by and large, the older generation of Jews want so much to support Israel and cling on desperately to some kind of two-state solution idea, which will never happen. but they cling on to it because that way they can preserve their notion of Israel.
Ned, since time is short, if you don't mind, it's a fascinating comparison, but I think I sort of, moved you away from my own question. Why go after Palestinian children in such a big way?
I think that there is a deeply held belief by many Jewish Israelis, and certainly by many in the army, that Palestinian life is not as valuable, as worthy, as sacred as Jewish life. And if you kill a Palestinian, well, maybe that Palestinian was going to someday be a terrorist and kill Jews.
And
maybe what you're doing is justified.
Yeah, I fully agree with Ned. And also, I would say the Jewish rabbis in Israel, the chief Jewish rabbis, they played a very, very dangerous role because they kept indoctrinated the young Israeli soldiers that it is okay to kill Palestinian children. It's even okay, some of the Israeli leaders said it's okay to kill Palestinian women because these Palestinian women will breed snakes, and those snakes will come and bite us later on. So it's okay to kill the children. It's okay, and this is chief rabbis in Israel telling their soldiers, telling their young men that it's okay to kill Palestinians. And
dehumanization is desensitizing soldiers, and you're saying the younger you are, the higher chances you're conservative, maybe in the sense of being a staunch Zionist and thinking Palestinian life
not
indispensable. Well, thank you so much for enlightening our audience. And, both of you are busy people doing a noble cause. Thank you so much, Ned Rosch. I wish I can talk to you more. I wish my children can talk to your children. And I hope you both stay a little bit after this. I like to hear a little more and seek your guidance. And thank you, Reverend Alex Awad, for your services and going through prison after prison after prison to teach Christian Palestinian what their faith needed. So thank you so much, all of you, for watching. This is Muslim Network TV. You're watching Galaxy 19, satellite, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, YouTube, Facebook. Pretty soon we'll be on Apple TV as well as on iPhone and Android phone as well. And thank you so much, Sumaya Haider and Zahra Nadeem, for producing today's show. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. Stay tuned. There are going to be more programs. We are 24/7 on this particular TV.
Thank you so much.
Salam.
Salam.